day of the convention comes much too quickly. Here we are, Monday morning, and just hours before the closing ceremonies. But I want to thank all of you for the wonderful hospitality that you all extended to us. And despite our difficult to understand American and our efforts at understanding you, you've been very patient, and we appreciate that very much. And thank you so much for your hospitality.
Just to go ahead. Taking pictures of me pouring water? Well, same goes for me. This has been number 207 for me. You've probably passed me up a long time ago on a number of conventions, but don't forget I started off as a fan on the other side when I began in 1969. The conventions over here, I've said this over and over and over again, they're so different from conventions that George and I go to in the States. It's much more personal here. It's a lot more friendly. The audiences here are amazingly tolerant of changes that occur in the program. I remember at one point yesterday, everybody was told they had to leave the room so that they could clear it for an autograph session. Everybody politely got up and went out, and we were commenting on how in the States that would have caused a riot. So it's really a treat for us to be here. It really is. And I hope you've had as much of a good time as we have. Now, should we open it for questions?
Well, I have a bone to pick with you.
Oh!
And I thought I would save it for this public occasion. Because I have done it with you privately, and you're still doing it publicly. And it has to do with the Chinese theater ceremony.
Ah, yes.
There's a discrepancy between his story and mine. Now, Richard did not have a good vantage point. He was way on the side, and I was there. And so when I heard that you had it a little confused, I corrected you privately. But I got a report yesterday that you again repeated that distorted and uninformed position again. So I'm going to tell you publicly, I did not fall into the concrete. And I've told you this. It was calculated, it was thought out, it was being a chauvinistic Angelino, and it was a deliberate thing. Now, repeat after me. Richard, this is like a marriage vow. We do it publicly. George Takei did not...
George Takei did not fall
into the concrete when he was making his handprint in the concrete in front of the Chinese theater in December of 1991.
It's still far away though.
So affirm.
I so affirm.
There, now you got it. This is how those distorted legends start, and I don't want my legend to be distorted, so I thought we'd do it properly, publicly.
I've always thought that it sounds better that it was an accident than he intentionally.
Oh, no.
If you want them to know you intentionally did.
Absolutely, because I am a native Angelino.
You're the only one.
I'm the only one.
The cast.
Bill and Jimmy are Canadians.
So?
Like you.
Yeah.
Yes. And Leonard is a Bostonian. Michelle is a Chicagoan, Illinois. Walter is from New York City. DeForest is from Georgia. And so I had to carry the standard for my city. And so, yes, it was very thoroughly thought out, and I made it look like a spontaneous, impetuous gesture.
From where I was, it looked like you went forward into it.
Of course,
yeah.
I don't go backward into the concrete.
But you came up laughing as though, uh-oh, and you had the concrete on your head.
No, I did it proudly, and I went like this. And besides, it's recorded on camera.
I've seen it again.
And there is a witness from that event here. Brad, are you here? No, he isn't. He's upstairs packing. But he had a VIP vantage point, and he saw me do it. I didn't do it like this. I did it like this. But it was deliberate.
Well, it didn't take long for everybody else to join either.
And so now you here in Glasgow saw it happen. Richard got it straight. An historic moment. Now, do you have a query of me?
Okay, shall we?
Go ahead.
Ensign Picard.
Oh, yes, okay.
Okay, now, as you may not know, Mike Okuda and Rick Stern, who did the technical manual and have worked on both the films and the new series in graphics and design, they're coming up with a timeline. And in that timeline, all of the established dates from the new series and the original series are being laid out from the earliest date, which is, I think, a couple million years ago when they're referring to planets being developed in some episode, up to the farthest future reference, which I think is the 10 billion years from now our sun should burn out, something like that. So it's all these references of time throughout the entire run of the original series, the films, and the new series. Oh, you'll be happy to know that because in Star Trek VI, Hikaru is mentioned for the first time, that is now through the entire history of Star Trek, starting with the birth of Hikaru Sulu in, I think, well, I don't want to give away your birthday. Anyway, it's 2230s, somewhere in that area. In the episode First Duty, if you recall, Picard graduates in 2327, at which point Sulu would be approximately 90. So you're going to be a very senior captain.
Well, now,
if he's going to have Ensign Picard.
Mr. Know-It-All, let me quote from Star Trek II, deathless lines uttered by Spock, who died in that episode. See, he thinks much too logically, precisely, and historically. That the line goes, there are always possibilities.
Absolutely.
How do you know I'm not 90? And how old is Picard? All this has not been set. And anything, it can happen. People can look very young in the future. Someone my age 200 years ago would have looked wizened and ancient. And here we are, our age, looking vigorous, dynamic, swashbuckling, and heroic, right? So, in 300 years, we're going to look much, much younger and be much more active and vital and energetic in our 90s and 100s. I have a grandmother who passed on at 105 years old. Her genes are going through me.
I didn't know she did.
2 months ago.
After your mother came back.
Yes. Oh, yes. I'm sorry it came as such a shock to you, but I used to talk about my grandmother an awful lot. She's really an amazing lady. I may have mentioned her to many of you before on other occasions. She came to the United States as a 19-year-old immigrant and went back to Japan when she was widowed in her mid-70s. And she's always been an energetic lady and she was endlessly curious about things. She went back to Japan and she was constantly traveling on that bullet train. We would get letters and postcards from her almost every month. telling us of all the places she's visiting in northern Japan or southern Japan or western Japan, and she'd go on these cruises to Southeast Asia. She was really a dynamic lady, and when she became 100 in 1986, that also happened to be the 20th anniversary of Star Trek, and they were having a great big party at Paramount in that September. But that was also my grandmother's centenary, and my priorities were obviously with her. And so I went to Japan, where she greeted her grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren from 3 continents, from Asia, and, well, actually 3 countries, Japan, the United States, and Canada. I have an aunt that married a Canadian, so I have Canadian cousins as well. And we all gathered there and helped her celebrate her 100th birthday. She's a very strong lady. Actually, all of the North American grandchildren are glad that she's gone to Japan, because we love her very dearly. We loved her very dearly, but she was also overbearing. And we were glad that the Japanese word for grandma is bachan. We were glad that bachan was there so that we could get her in small doses where we can continue to love her. She started to weaken early this year, and my mother got a telephone, she's my mother's mother, got a telephone call from Japan early this year, and she was planning to go to Japan to be with her when she got another telephone call saying that my grandmother is well again, and don't worry. And so she canceled her plans. But then about 2 weeks after that, she got another call saying that my grandmother was weakening again. And so she said she's going to go back, and she doesn't care if she gets well. And she was there with my grandmother for about 2 months this year. But she was one of those ladies that just, by sheer will, makes herself well. And she got to the point where she was taking solid food again and chatting with my mother. And because she was on the upswing again for about 2 months, my mother came back. And about a week after my mother returned, we got the call that she passed on. But she lived a very, very full, rich life, 105 years. You know, women are known to lie about their age. She used to lie in one direction until she reached 100. And when she passed 100, she started lying in the opposite. So many people, many of her friends, recent acquaintances, think she was 106 years old when she passed on, but we know better. And we have wonderful memories of my grandmother, and it's thanks to her that I'm able to speak Japanese, because she lived with us when we were children, and my grandparents, my parents wanted us to be able to communicate with her, so we hated it as children, but we went to Japanese language school on Saturdays. After 5 days of regular schoolwork, why did we have to go to school again? But because of my grandmother, we had to go through that, and I'm deeply grateful for that, because it gave me that additional widening of my horizon. And certainly she has really not just widened my horizon, but given me a better, deeper understanding of my heritage and of people generally. She was a wonderful lady, and I'm glad I have her genes inside me. Well, let's open it up for a dialogue. Yes, back there.
It's a brief question to Richard about the suit communicators, the next generation.
Communicator badges?
It's quite straightforward how you get them on, but you never seem to have any way of actually switching them off properly, because they never say out from the away team or whatever. And I was wondering how it was controlled, because it can't even be controlled from the mothership, because when they're down on an away team mission and they communicate between each other, they don't seem to switch them off in any way. So, is there any answer?
Well, not a legitimate answer, but an answer. The first season, most of the actors learn to turn it on, turn it off. Jonathan frequently forgot to turn it on. He'd start his dialogue, and Jonathan also, first season, would always talk to the ceiling after he started his communicator up. But eventually they got very good at turning on and turning off, and then second season, directors, cast, everyone seemed to forget that you're supposed to shut it off. So Michael Kuda and I were talking about that with Ron Moore, and it's been decided that the ship's computers are so intelligent that they know when you're not talking to them anymore. But no, they should tap it again to shut it off. If you look at the first season, you'll see that they do pretty consistently, but it just seems to have been lost now. But Jonathan still loves to turn it on. He got really good at, whack. That's it.
Okay, isn't it? Yes, it's rough.
Question to George. What got you interested in acting in the first place? And if you weren't an actor, what would you have liked to have done?
Well, I don't think people get interested in acting. I think, well, my mother says I made my theatrical debut in the maternity ward. We're born this way. We can't help it. We apologize. As far back as I can remember, grammar school, I was trying out for every school play. My backyard was an amphitheater. I used to recruit the neighborhood kids to either be my supporting actors or my audience or my set changers. I think it's something that's ingrown. But as you grow older, you start to learn that that's not something that's very secure and remunerative if you want to dedicate your life to it. And so my father my father wanted me to be an architect, so I began my college studies as an architecture student. But eventually there comes that time, if you have that burning passion in you, to take that risk, that gamble with your life. And I think that's what determines whether you really want to be an actor or not, whether you're really willing to make that kind of commitment and take that risk with your life. And I did, and fortunately I had understanding parents who indulged me and supported me in that. I think the advice I would give is to get as much experience as you can in front of that beast called an audience, and particularly a paying audience. Oh, they're cruel. They're very demanding. And if it's a comedy, they sit there with that frown on their face, daring you to make them laugh. It's a very, very tough animal, that thing called an audience. I must say, Star Trek audiences, you guys are very, very kind and generous, but you're exceptional audiences. Get as much experience as you can in front of that animal, because that helps you develop that sense of relationship, of timing, of just your metabolism with that other animal. You have to be tough enough to take rejections, because that's guaranteed you. Heartbreak, rejections, disappointment. That comes with a decision to become an actor. It helps to have, well, it helps to have a lot of things, but one essential, it helps to have talent. It's very important that you be tough. It's important that you're able to sort of shift with the punches. You've got to be passionately in love with this. You've got to have that driving ambition. But the most helpful thing is you've got to be out of your mind. It helps to be crazy. There was no preparation for that character in the lore, the history of Star Trek. And I think that's also what makes people's lives interesting, because we have things happen in our lives that we couldn't predict or didn't know, and a forgotten, lost cousin or an aunt or an uncle or people like that. And in that respect, it's very much like real life, the unexpected. And that was that unexpected thing about Spock's life. And there were so many different things. Something that wasn't consistent with the Vulcan history. It seemed a little aberrant, and in that sense it was consistent with Star Trek V. There are a lot of aberrant things there. I was personally thrown aback by it. I found it difficult to reconcile. But it was played by an actor that was so charming. Larry Luckenbill looked like an elf, and sometimes he would come on the set and he'd do some of his comedy routines and come, prancing on and roll his eyes and all, and he had us rolling on the floor. He's a funny, funny man, and I'm glad that it gave us that kind of opportunity to work with a very fine actor. But in terms of the lore of Star Trek, I'd say consistent.
Gene first got the first draft script. He objected to the idea that Sybok would be Spock's brother, so he became his half-brother. And Gene still objected to it and said, why couldn't he simply be a cousin or just another Vulcan? Why does he have to be related? And I don't think Gene ever got a satisfactory answer as to why he would have to be related. Spock would feel the same way about any fellow Vulcan as he would about somebody who was related to him or not. But I think Harv felt that for the sake of the audience, and Bill felt for the sake of the audience, there had to be an actual blood bond there in order for Spock to go through what Spock would have to later go through in the film. Gene had problems with the concepts of Vulcan princesses and so on, establishing a lore that had never been established before. But I think they got the script to a point where Gene felt that it was acceptable enough that as long as they understood that he objected to it, he would let it go forward. But there were a lot of little points like that throughout the script. Kirk would never have been screaming at Spock, as far as Gene was concerned, kill him, which was in the script. And they ended up shoot him instead. Little things like that. A constant problem the first few years on The Next Generation. People setting their phasers on kill, and Gene saying there's no such thing as a kill setting. It's stun or it's setting 8 or whatever, but we don't kill. And it's just Gene's very clear vision of what Star Trek was. So Sybok, yeah, I have problems with that as well. We'll just repeat it right here. Oh.
No.
In the episode Sarek, Picard mentions he was at the wedding of Sarek's son. If that wasn't Spock, that means Sarek is another son. If it was Spock, Spock abandons his family, does he, when in unification? What has become of his family?
If Picard is actually referring to Spock as the son of Sarek, or the ambassador's son in that particular episode, it was never really established. That was one of those little things to tease the audience, I think. Somebody asked Gene, does he think that might be Spock that he was referring to? And Gene said, sure, why not? I mean, it didn't really make any difference because they're specific in the actual episode, but Gene said, why not? But then that makes him a deserter of his family if he just takes off for Romulus next year. When we talked about it, again, Ron Moore, who was writing, if Spock had married, if Sarek had married Perrin some 30 years, 40, 50 years, we have no idea how long that relationship is. There could even have been other marriages in between. It's an 80-year period from the end of the films to the third season, certainly. So he could have had multiple marriages in that time frame and had other sons. And it doesn't seem out of the question to have Spock get married at the age of 80, 90. After all, his father would have. But at the same time, nothing's established, so it's all if, or maybe, possibly. For me, it would be better if it wasn't Spock, only because then he doesn't simply desert his family. When he wraps everything up and just takes off at the end, or at the beginning of unification. I'd rather be somebody else. Yes.
Right here.
We heard constant rumours before Star Trek VI came out that there was supposed to be a love scene between Valeris and Spock. Was there, and was it cut, or wasn't there?
That was started by Nicholas Meyer. Before he even left to direct the film, he started those rumors in this country about Spock getting married, Kirk being killed, etc. He began those. I think he called them backfire rumors to keep the fans busy. The relationship, after all, was supposed to be Saavik and Spock, was that of teacher and pupil. For some reason, Kim Cattrall came in thinking that there was a lot more to it than that, and she said so in interviews, and I've seen her at one convention, and she was going on and on about it, and the audience had already seen the film at this convention in New York, and were sort of sitting there, what is she talking about? They shared a drink in his quarters, and that was it. There was nothing more in the script. That was it. I think more was built into the book, the novelization, but that was post the film. Final. So, mostly Nick's rumor and Kim's imagination, I think, is the answer to that. But that relationship was meant to be teacher-pupil. Hope that helps.
May I ask what happened actually to Saavik? Because the last we hear of her is in Star Trek IV, when she's left on Vulcan. What happens to her after that?
Probably know more about
Well, let's go back to 3, when Spock is rapidly aging and suddenly starts Ponfar, and they're in the cave, and they start with the finger nookie nookie, and we assume that something happens there, because if you look closely, the next morning when they haul the two of them up, the Klingons, there are cigarette butts on the floor. And actually there are, which is, I've got a slide, and they're rehearsing the scene, and there are literally cigarette butts on the floor. That was, I think, merit. The original script for 4 has it that Saavik is pregnant. So, I mean, that's actually there. There were lines that survived right into filming of Star Trek IV. Where McCoy says to her as she's about to leave the ship, don't worry, you'll be in the best of care, or whatever. And certainly the way Leonard directed her response to seeing him, she was to look down almost as though she felt some guilt about what had happened. This is how he told her to play the scene. But that was all cut. And I think, again, it's in the novelization because, again, they're working from the earlier draft. If, in fact, she does have the child on Vulcan, and I think Dorothy Fontana said that it's a longer gestation, so 13 months, something like that, she's probably raising Spock Jr. on Vulcan. I would think with Amanda. Now, why wasn't she in 6? Why was there Valeris? When Nicholas Meyer was casting Star Trek II, his original choice for the role of Saavik was Kim Cattrall. She wasn't available. He got Kirstie Alley, basically unknown. Kirstie played the role, wonderful in it. And then 3 comes along. Kirstie's in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof at the Mark Taper Forum, and had just signed the series Masquerade, which only ran 6 episodes, but it was a series, and she didn't want to sort of take a step back, actually, and do another Trek film. And she and Harb discussed it, so he basically made her a ridiculously low offer, and she didn't accept it. And then Robin came in. When Nick came back to do 6, he wanted Kirstie, and there were some overtures to Kirstie, and she didn't want to do it. So he then went to his original choice, which was Kim. And Kim was playing Saavik. The script pages right up to the end of the shoot still said Saavik, but they were saying Valeris on the set. Because of the objections to Saavik turning traitor from Gene and various other people.
And also Kim didn't want to create a character that had been played by other actresses.
She would have been the 3rd actress to play the same role. Gene felt that the character of Saavik had become a family member, and that would have been very hard for most of the fans to accept, this family member who was so proud of her background and her achievements, and was so shocked that David would cheat, and so shocked that Kirk would cheat and lie, to then turn around and do much worse herself. So these are all elements of why it wasn't. But as to where Saavik is now, she's changing nappies. There was last question. Okay, there was somebody up front here also had a question, or was it the same question? No. Over here?
Over there against the wall.
If Saavik is changing nappies at the end of Star Trek 4, is there any chance of the couch appearing in The Next Generation or Deep Space Nine?
Or one of the crew for Captain Sulu. Yes, possibly. Ensign Spockette. Let's see. That's 2286. So Next Generation time frame. That person would be 90 years old.
Middle age for a Vulcan.
Yes, but older than any Vulcan we've seen in service. Deep Space Nine is the same time frame as Next Generation. We won't see so many service people. Deep Space Nine, service people, service persons, crew members in Deep Space Nine. That's going to be a lot of civilians and aliens, and there won't be so much in the way of Starfleet personnel in that. So there could be Vulcan scientists, medical personnel. It's certainly a possibility. But look at the format, the writer's guide that Gene had written for The Next Generation. Now they're throwing all that out for Deep Space Nine. They're going to do it their own way. But Gene always felt it was a mistake to do descendants, offspring. He felt that was something of a cheat. That's why he wouldn't allow any offspring of the original series characters, because he didn't want anyone thinking that he was using the original series success in order to make The Next Generation work. That's why he was very careful to establish all new characters. Didn't want anybody thinking he was coattailing it. And it wasn't until 3rd season there was any crossover. And that was Sarek, who wasn't really a regular. It wasn't until the 5th season that there was actually a character named from the original series. McCoy was never identified as McCoy in the 2-hour pilot. That was strictly for the fans. And that was just to let you know how much later it was by showing him as a 137-year-old, very crotchety, should have been retired years ago admiral. But there's always possibilities, as somebody said.
Scotty will be making an appearance on The Next Generation. I happened to be talking with Jimmy the day before I left, as a matter of fact, and Jimmy was absolutely ecstatic to learn that he was going to be doing The Next Generation. He hadn't received the script yet. He didn't know what the subtitle was. He didn't know whether he was going to be aged or not, but he was hoping that he would be, himself, and that he wouldn't have to spend 2-3 hours in makeup becoming ancient. But so he knew nothing other than the fact that he was going to be doing it, and he was absolutely delighted. He knew also that he was going to be working in August for 8 days. So do look forward to an appearance by Scotty on The Next Generation next season.
It's about the fourth or fifth episode, and it's Ron Moore again. He seems to be writing most of the best ones, and Ron's got an incredibly clever way of bringing Scotty into the 24th century, but it's none of the previously used ideas. There's no time travel story or anything like that. It's very clever. Jimmy should get that script in about 2 weeks. And when I spoke to him, he was very excited about it. He just signed his contract the day I called him. Okay, we're going to have to go pack and to be back down here for 11:15, which is still closing ceremony time. Good. Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you then.